Hi there, welcome to Gaining Vision. I'm Melanie. Thanks so much for clicking. To my returning subscribers, thank you for your continuous love and support. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Please feel at home. Have you had an opportunity to subscribe to the channel yet? If not, take a second, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to like and share. It's free after all. When I say the term NATO, what comes to your mind? For myself, growing up, I thought of NATO as something that would keep us safe, avoid World War III, and definitely keep us safe from Russia. And I was surprised to learn that Africa didn't see things the same way.
You saw the problem of Libya. Libya, our late friend Muammar Gaddafi had his issues. When this problem of Libya started, the African Union, with our chairman who is here now, this gentleman here, they formed a committee of a few of us. I think we were 6. I was one of them. The whole of the African Union gave that committee the mandate to look for a solution for the Libyan problem. Now, on one occasion, I didn't go that time. These excellencies, this one here, Jacob Zuma, and the others, I was not there, but my minister was among them. They entered a plane in Nouakchott, in his place. They were going to Libya to mediate. And they were told by NATO to go back. Yes. Said, you go back. Yes, he's here. If I'm telling lies, I'm not the one who invited him, you're the one who invited him. African presidents on an African mission over African soil were ordered by NATO to go back. That NATO has not allowed them to land in Libya. Now, we call this in Swahili, dharau, contempt. This is contempt. So now you can weigh yourselves now. Your presidents were ordered by NATO. 6 of them, not one. If it was only 7, maybe you could say. 6 excellencies, African excellencies, were ordered, go back. Over Africa. Now, these fellows didn't listen to us. They continued. They killed Gaddafi. Now Libya is in tatters.
So when Russia invaded Ukraine based on the fact they wanted to join NATO, I was shocked. I didn't understand this fully, so I needed to understand a little bit more. And as I was doing research into Africa and the BBC video when Julius Malema, I noticed Africa was staying pretty neutral on the topic of the war with Russia and Ukraine. But when Julius Malema was interviewed by the BBC reporter, he said he was supporting the war, and I could not comprehend why.
Let's take one particular aspect of your policy positions.
Yes.
Do you think aligning yourself with Vladimir Putin is going to be good for South Africa?
But that's what it is now. South Africa is in alliance with Russia, with India, with Brazil, with China. So why are you asking me as if it's some policy that is going to be implemented
South Africa right
after
now,
I took over? South Africa is in alliance with Russia now.
South Africa right now calls itself non-aligned.
In the context of the war, but these are 2 different things. South Africa is an ally of Russia. Now, the second question is, where does South Africa stand on the war? It says I'm a non-aligned in relation to war, but Russia remains South Africa's friend. So we cannot create confusion around there. Don't create an impression that it is Malema who's going to come and create an alliance with Russia.
But there are some very specific...
Actually, I will go beyond that. I will go beyond the friendship with Russia, and in the war, I will align with Russia, and I will even supply the weapons to Russia, because Russia is in a war with imperialism, and any agenda that seeks to push back imperialist agendas, it's well within the policies of the EFF. We are with President Putin because it's not enemy of my enemy. It is an anti-imperialist agenda that says the American dominance and its allies should be undermined at all costs.
Anti-imperialism, even though Vladimir Putin is quite explicit about his desire to revive a form of empire. He says countries like Ukraine have no right to independent sovereign existence. He appears to believe that the best thing would be to revive an empire, the Soviet empire. But you're anti-imperialist?
We are anti-imperialist. That's a debate for another day. The war is not what he's talking. The war is about the expansion. And had there been a common ground found, this could have been avoided. We are not for imperialism, even if it were to come from Russia. If he does that, we'll condemn it. But we know for a fact that progressive forces such as China have also aligned themselves with Putin to try and create an alternative from the imperialist domination of the world. And that's what the EFF is about.
Could it be true that Russia wasn't a threat? So I had to do a lot of research, and I came across a video of an economist, Jeffrey Sachs, talking about the history of NATO and the truth, the missed opportunities, and so much more that I didn't even know about NATO. And I'm going to play it here. It is lengthy, but I encourage us all to watch it to the end because you will be as educated as I was. I was shocked to find out that we could have possibly avoided the war between Ukraine and Russia. Let's take a listen.
We are spending in the world today, by the most recent estimates, $2.2 trillion on military outlays alone. $2.2 trillion per year is more than enough to end all extreme poverty. My country, the United States, shockingly, is 40% of that military spending, $1 trillion per year. It's a deranged political system which happily votes for military outlays but refuses to vote for compassionate outlays. And this is deeply embedded in our political system today. And it's making the world so much more dangerous, so much more unequal, and so much more crisis-ridden than can be imagined. And by the way, it does nothing for the American people. This is not even a case of America exploiting the world. It's America endangering the world and ruining itself at the same time. Austria was one of the countries occupied by the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. Almost all of the countries occupied by the Soviet Union at the end of World War II had the Soviet troops on their territory until 1989, typically in very repressive conditions. Austria was an exception. The Soviet troops went home voluntarily from Austria in 1955. It's a very interesting case to understand about war and peace. What happened that led the Soviet Union to voluntarily withdraw from Austria and then leave Austria alone for all of the period from 1955 until today? Was it that Austria is part of NATO? No. Austria, in fact, is the one country in the region not part of NATO. What happened in 1955 was that Austria clearly declared its neutrality, that it would never accept NATO or American troops or weaponry, that it would be a neutral country. And on that basis, the Soviet Union left, because Austria was not a threat. And so the troops went home. Austria became a vibrant democratic country, a really wonderful country, by the way, that has a tremendous quality of life and culture. And it was never once threatened by the Soviet Union or Russia since then, not in one single moment or one single episode, because it was not a threat to the Soviet Union or to Russia. It was a neutral country. It's a very instructive and almost completely forgotten episode in history. And it's an episode that deserves a tremendously deeper understanding, not only for Austria, but for what might have been in the world. Because one of the reasons that the Soviet Union made that step was that it wanted to set an example. The message in 1955 was, if a country becomes neutral, we leave. And the aim of the Soviet Union in 1955 was to try to convince the United States to have Germany be a neutral country. This is very interesting because, of course, Nazi Germany had caused more than 20 million deaths in the Soviet Union. And at the end of 1945, the Soviet Union, which had been more destroyed and had suffered more than any other country in the total deaths, demanded demilitarization of Germany. The United States said no. Starting in the late 1940s, the US started to arm Germany. And by 1951, the US zone of occupation, together with the British and French zone of occupation, had become the Federal Republic of Germany and had been incorporated into the new US military alliance, into NATO. And the Russians, the Soviets, were very concerned about this because this was a remilitarization of a country that just a few years earlier had invaded and caused more than 20 million deaths. And the Soviet Union was saying to the United States, we need a peace treaty. We need an agreement. We need to stop the remilitarization of Germany. And the US was saying, no, we are NATO. We're against you. We will defend against you. And after Stalin's death and Khrushchev coming to power in 1955, the Soviet Union tried again. And the Austrian state declared its neutrality, and the Soviet army went home. And the message was, neutralize Germany and we can end the threat to us and we can find a new peace arrangement in Europe. The United States completely rejected the idea, said we will not have a neutral Germany, we'll have a militarized Germany. Our leading diplomat and historian in 1955, our greatest Russia expert, George Kennan, argued vigorously, let us have a neutral Germany. This way we'll have peace. This way we can end the confrontation with the Soviet Union. He was the author, no less, of the containment policy. But he said, I don't mean containment to be a new Cold War or hot war. I mean it to be a prudent policy. We should neutralize Germany. And in 1957, he gave the BBC Wreath lectures calling for this, but he wasn't listened to. So we had a Cold War and an arms race and no peace, and nearly blew up the world in 1962, 61 years ago, because of a nuclear confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the roots of that, if you look deeply, actually involve Berlin and Germany. If you look deeply at the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was about the same issue. This is almost completely not understood, except by our finest historians. But it's not the way we tell the story at all. So the US gave up the chance for peace. Miraculously, the world survived. Then arose a very wise and peaceful and peace-seeking leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was truly a great man, an incredibly decent person. I had the privilege to be on his economic advisory team for 1 year, trying to help mobilize Western support for a collapsing Soviet economy. I failed completely in that because the US, again, was uninterested in doing anything, even to help a peace-seeking leader of the Soviet Union. And as you know, Mr. Gorbachev, President Gorbachev, unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact military alliance in 1990. And at that moment, the leaders of the United States and Germany promised Gorbachev, we will not take advantage of that by expanding NATO even 1 inch eastward in response to your action. Of course, Gorbachev fell the next year, in part because of the financial crisis that the Soviet Union was facing, that the United States refused to help. And as soon as the Soviet Union ended, the strategists in the Pentagon and the White House and the CIA immediately began to plan the expansion of NATO. And so again, the US turned down peace. It could not take yes for an answer. I happened to be rather deeply inside the process in the Soviet then Russian side, because after Mr. Gorbachev fell from power, President Yeltsin asked me to help advise Russia. I said, surely, Mr. President, the United States will understand now to give financial help. Maybe it could not understand with the Soviet Union, but surely with an independent Russia now. And again, the United States absolutely said we're not helping at all. And so just as these two leaders were saying, we want peace, we want normalcy, we want the end of conflict, the United States began planning the unipolar world. Quite literally planning step by step. Even leaders in the Pentagon told one of the generals that I know rather well, Wesley Clark, that now the United States will launch several wars to overthrow Russian allied governments because we now know that Russia can do nothing in response. This is what Clark was told in the early 1990s. And the list included Iraq with Saddam Hussein, Syria with Assad, Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. And those are the wars that came. Those were planned wars. And the NATO enlargement was planned starting in 1992, but really planned in detail by 1997. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, the strategist and advisor to President Carter, wrote an article in 1997 explaining the timeline of NATO enlargement to Ukraine to be between 2005 and 2010. Of course, the Russian leadership said, no, don't do that. That's our red line. Don't cross it. The United States said, we don't hear you. You don't have any say in this. It's literally NATO doctrine, literally. It's enshrined in NATO doctrine that no country outside of NATO has any say in where NATO will enlarge, even if NATO is enlarging to a 2,000-kilometer border of the country. So the United States said, we will enlarge to Ukraine, and Russia, you have no say in it whatsoever. In 2007, President Putin said, don't do this. Do not do this. We're very concerned. We do not want you on our border. The United States. The United States ignored that, and in 2008 committed to NATO enlargement. This is why we have the war in Ukraine. The unrelenting pursuit of power and not listening to anybody else, to any prudent warnings at all. Interestingly, in 2008, the US ambassador to Russia wrote a secret cable back to Washington. That ambassador was William Burns. He's now the CIA director. His secret memo got leaked by WikiLeaks, so we got to read it. Because other than leaks, we don't read anything of what the US government really thinks. Everything is secret. And the media are not Storm media. They are USG media. So we read literally nothing but what the US government wants us to read. But this memo was made public by Assange. And the title of the memo is Niet means Niet. And the content of the memo was, it is not just a matter of President Putin, it is every member of the leadership of Russia that opposes NATO enlargement. Pro-Putin, anti-Putin, doesn't matter. All Russian political class does not want NATO on Russia's border. And by the way, I don't blame them for one moment. Who would want NATO on your border? Not I. But it was ignored again. Kennan was ignored, Burns was ignored, Jack Matlock, our US ambassador to the Soviet Union, was ignored. William Perry, our Secretary of Defense, was ignored. The ones that were listened to were Raytheon. They have military establishments in every congressional district. It's jobs, it's money. They pay for all the think tanks on the East Coast. It's big business. Biden has been part of that for more than 30 years. But basically every president is by the time they get there. And so the US could not listen to a red line. And then I won't go through all of the rest of the history because this is not our main topic, but it really is our main topic. In 2014, the US helped to overthrow the last Ukrainian government that just wanted calm, because President Viktor Yanukovych wanted neutrality. He's being pulled by the US on one side. He's being pulled by Russia on the other side. He's trying to keep calm. So he gets the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, to vote for neutrality. Smart man. Then Europe is saying, you must sign our agreement with us now, now, now. And President Putin's saying, no, don't sign. You will divert trade. We are your major trading partner. We have to be part of this trade agreement. And Europe is saying, Russia, you have nothing to do with this. And Russia's saying, yes, but you are making a trade agreement. We already have a trade agreement with Ukraine. We're party to this. No, no, you have nothing to do with this. Because this is a game. This is not honesty. This is not grown-up behavior. And so a protest started when Yanukovych delayed signing the agreement with the European Union, and the US stoked the protest behind the scenes, pouring huge amounts of money into the protest, funding it. I know it. I saw it with my own eyes, by the way. Leading American NGOs working side by side with the government, pouring in vast money for that protest. Not saying we don't want to interfere, directly leading the protest. And then a violent overthrow of the government, and the new government came in and said, we want NATO. And then the United States said, we'll make you safe. We'll give you lots of armaments. You'll be perfectly safe. And so the US started a mass sale of arms to Ukraine, guaranteed to destroy the country. Absolutely. Clear as could be. They did it. They absolutely destroyed the country. Because at the end of 2021, President Putin made one last try, stop NATO enlargement. And on December 17th, 2021, he put on the table a draft US-Russia security agreement. And he had some very important correct points. And I'm not a Putin apologist. I am an objective observer over the last 30 years. President Putin observed the following. First, stop NATO enlargement to our border. Second, the US had walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty unilaterally in 2002, and it had basically ended, it started to place Aegis missiles in Poland and Romania. And Putin said, we don't even know what is in those silos, but it's a few minutes from Moscow. This is intolerable. You unilaterally left a treaty, now we are vulnerable. The United States said, we don't negotiate with you. And in January 2022, the US gave a formal reply to Putin. And the formal reply is, NATO enlargement is none of your business. Literally, that is U.S. policy. It's none of your business. Not that we will sit down and discuss, negotiate, try to understand your security concerns. It's none of your business. I actually called the White House on December 30th, 2021, and spoke to one of the top officials, not to the president, and begged them, negotiate, avoid a war. No, no, Jeffrey, we don't have to negotiate. It's not really about NATO, I was told. I said, if it's not about NATO, say that NATO won't enlarge. No, no, we can't do that. And on February 21st, 2022, Russia Security Council met. President Putin asked Foreign Minister Lavrov, give a report of the status of your discussions with the Americans. Lavrov responded that we have received a firm reply of no negotiation over NATO. We have tried, Mr. President, but we did not succeed. The U.S. will not engage in negotiations. And 3 days later, the special military operation took place. Since then, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are killed. 10 million have fled the country. The economic collapse is probably more than 50%. Ukraine is losing around 1,000 soldiers every day, killed or seriously wounded right now. This so-called offensive or counteroffensive is a death trap. And the U.S. knows it, but we have a presidential election coming up, so we can't quite say it, because that might be embarrassing for the president. And so Ukraine is told, keep throwing your soldiers 1,000 a day to their death or to their permanent disability. And they keep doing it.
I know, that was a lot to digest, wasn't it? Did you learn something? I couldn't believe the differences and opportunities that NATO could have avoided this war. And now I understand how Russia has impacted other areas of the world, including Africa, and how Africa's experience with NATO has made them not be so quick to jump into commenting on the war. There is more to this world that I didn't know about, and different perspectives about the view of Russia. That Russia just wants to keep NATO away from their borders. Austria was a great example of that. Amazingly, they stepped away from NATO and Russia backed off. So is Russia quite the threat that we all thought it was here where I live? Food for thought. I will continue to do my research with many different sources to really discover, because I'm sure it's not just NATO and the war with Ukraine and Russia that I have been misinformed on. I encourage us all to continuously do our research. It is our responsibility as global citizens to be well informed from many different sources, not just one-sided opinions about what's happening in our world. That way we can play an active part in making solutions come to the forefront. Please take a second, hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and please, I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about what you learned from this video. Let's all learn and grow together. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.